Hello, everyone. Welcome to this audio podcast. In this sort of audio podcast series in around the ZtormTronix case review. This is an audio podcast aligned to nephrology and how do young people with chronic kidney disease (CKD) cope, and what are the experiences between pediatric renal services and adult renal care. This is an audio podcast aligned to a Storm Robotics RFPB and an audio podcast aligned to another Storm Robotics production. This particular sort of specific and particular audio podcast will look at will highlight some aspects around this works in context of sort of context of looking at sort of looking at sort of works that had been produced sort of in following and in following works research that took place between 2010 and 2013, and to sort of follow up on sort of that works by way of sort of looking at this sort of works in context of a sort of a sort of a sort of follow up sort of investigation, or a follow up investigation, or works in aligned to looking in line to understanding sort of coping in context of a longitudinal sort of works, and again experiences between looking at sort of coping and experiences between pediatric renal services and renal care, where this works was sort of developed, at least in preliminary in 2014, 2015. So in this audio podcast, I'm gonna the overview will be, the overview here will be a little bit of sort of a recap on some of the background, some of the background aspects, some aspects in and around what is quality of life, and what is and also what is quality of life, and also what is what is coping, and then there will be in this audio podcast, there will be a sort of a basis in around a sort of an indication of how the research would be followed up if the aims and objectives in around the research are achieved and also in context of scientific from a scientific basis of value, and context of scientific contribution as well. So to big so in line to sort of the background again. A total of 800 a total of 861 children or young people under 18 years of age with chronic kidney disease had been receiving forms of care and treatment at pediatric in around pediatric nephrology centers, in sort of retrospectively in 2012, and I mentioned where it's been sort of evidenced from 2012, where 861 children and young people under 18 years with CKD, chronic kidney disease, were receiving treatment or aspects of care aligned to nephrology in 2012. Um, Sort of prospectively there would be prospectively there would have been more young people, children, potentially who would have been sort of receiving or having forms of treatment and care between pediatric nephrology centers at the same time. So, in context of consent, in context of sort of a census, at census, 80 point, just over 80% had a functioning renal transplant or kidney transplant, and 10 points, just over 10%, were or had been receiving a form of renal replacement therapy, such as, for example, hemodialysis, and not and just over 9% were receiving or had been receiving another form of renal replacement therapy referred to as peritoneal dialysis. Patients aged 16 to 18 years may have received sort of medical care or healthcare either in a pediatric or adult nephrology center, as data were incomplete for 16 to 18-year-old adolescent recipients or patients. They had been excluded from the majority of subsequent analyses, particularly when describing incidence and prevalence rates. There were 679 children or young people under 16 years of age receiving renal replacement therapy in the UK. Receiving renal replacement therapy in 2012, and where this sort of census or basis and was specific to is was specific to the United Kingdom. Further treatment modality analysis has been has been documented in evidence in sort of documentation and frameworks aligned to organizations, for example, the Renal Association, the British Association of Paediatric Nephrology, and more recently the UK Kidney Association, or UKKA, which where treatment modality analysis by age informs sort of the informs treatment modality by age, but also in context of prevalence, and aligned to and specific to the pediatric chronic kidney disease population. No children or young people had received a transplant, and that the majority of patients were being treated with peritoneal dialysis, and this is specific to 2012, where just under 60%, or just under 60%, and just over 50%, in context of children and young people being on peritoneal dialysis as sort of the form of renal replacement therapy. This contrasts with older children or young people in the age range between 12 to in the age range between 12 and 16, a year 12 to between 12 to 16-year age group, where 85% had functioning graft or allograft, and where similar proportions were on hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. Subsequent analysis of renal replacement modality by gender and ethnicity showed or highlighted no particular or no specific differences. However, as absolute subgroup numbers are small, caution is required. Caution is required in conducting any comparative analyses. There were 117 patients or young people under the age of 18 years under the age of 18 under the age of 18 years of age who were initiated on renal replacement therapy or RRT at specific pediatric renal centers in 2012. Analysis are restricted or had been restricted to just over 100 patients or recipients who were under the age of 16 years 16 under the age of 16 years of age. So in light of this and in aligned to, in sort of referring back to the previous the previous audio podcasts in this particular series. Here be a sort of a recap on aspects of on asking the question and hopefully asking the question and also putting in some context in around what is quality of life before looking at aspects in aligned to what is coping. What is quality of life? So the past decade, if not more, if not more, if not sort of if not more, sort of retrospectively, has seen an upsurge of intrigue in in sort of understanding in the understanding of quality of life or QOL in context of where investigators and researchers see look to sort of look to understand or sort of contextualize aspects of sort of underpinnings in around quality of life in context of quantitative regarding sort of research. Hundreds of generic and specific tests purporting to different aspects of quality of life have been developed. And although quality of life or QOL is a valid outcome sort of measure in context of pediatrics and young people. At the same time, it is hampered by a variety of factors, including its conceptual vagueness. The use of assessment measures can be dubious issues with validity and reliability, the inappropriateness of methods, and the weakness of statistical analyses. The relationship between QOL and coping differs. There's works by Fallowfield in 1996, that look that sort of where the author where the author sort of compares and contrasts in around looking at quality of life versus coping and vice versa to an extent. And there is no consensus on the definition of young people's coping with with or without chronic illness, and what aspects should be which aspects should be measured. There's works by Mulliners and team in 2003 sort of retrospectively that have documented some works in keeping and in around this. Quality of life has been, or QOL has been defined as and measured using markers of it. For example, in pediatrics, ironically in pediatrics and in young people's research, in context of where markers where markers are for example achievement, aspects in aligned to achievement such as marriage, jobs, and education. And there's works that are documented by Brem and team Bremen team in 1998, Snethen and team in 2004, and is generally accepted. It's generally accepted that QOL is it is generally accepted that QOL, or quality of life, is sort of a multifaceted and multidimensional sort of construct. And there's informed and inspired works by Iser and team in 2000. There's works by Iser and Jenny in 2007, and Iser and Morse in 2001, and Mueller's and team in 2003. Works now so in line to this and sort of now asking the question, what is coping? So coping is a theoretical concept concerned with a multifaceted phenomenon, with the multifaceted phenomenon of how humans think, feel, and act in stressful situations. There's works by Linkvist and team in 1998, and team in 2004, and Linkvist and Sodden in 1998, that sort of document some aspects in around the construct. Coping is a strategy that unfolds in the coping is a strategy that unfolds in the context of the situation in the context of a situation or a condition that is personally taxing or exceeding an individual's resources of stress. It works by Folkman and Moskowitz in 2004 sort of delve into delve into and look into the context of sort of situational context in around aspects of in around aspects of coping, aligned to sort of their works. And exploring coping is important, considering many young people feel less can feel less positive about their own qualities, or can be affected by by changes to environment, placing them at a higher risk of poorer psychological or psychosocial functioning. Coping research can be more informative if more is known about an individuals or recipients a recipient's approach to thoughts and actions in specific contexts. And there's works by there's works there's foundational works in around this, but informed works by Folkman in 2008, and Lazarus in 1993 as well. There is a need to identify coping strategies to gain a better view or perspective about how young people connect to the world around them. And so now, in context of sort of how research would be sort of followed up, if their aims and objectives in around this works this works sort of are achieved. Um, uh, so one longitude. So for example, so in and around this and the bases around this. Once longitudinal data has been collected, and if there is evidence to indicate a sort of integrative association between positive coping and transitioning in for young people between pediatric renal services and adult renal care. For example, the main outcome uh, the main outcome for the research is again to put forward a formal coping and transition guideline to complement clinical practice for young people suffering with chronic kidney disease. The guideline would be developed further in collaboration. The basis in context of scientific value and sort of scientific contribution and around this is that a guideline would be developed further in collaboration with participating sort of sites in participating sites and potentially tested in a small in sort of a pilot or a small pilot investigation after initial data and investigation has been sort of completed. The idea then the basis in around this as well is that this will be followed up potentially in collaboration with, for example, the British Association for Paediatric Nephrology, the Renal Association, and in an audio podcast previous as part of this series. There was mention of the American Society, sorry, the American Society of Pediatric Nephrology, as well potentially, and equally important, an effort would be made to work with sort of with in context of collaboration from a collaborative basis or collaborative approach. There would be an effort an effort would be made to sort of see that there is sort of an interplay between any sort of a transition sort of sort of task force and thus to develop a much required or needed sort of coping or transition guideline for clinical teams in line to in line to pediatric nephrology as well. So that draws this audio podcast aligned to this sort of overview in on the sort of research follow-up aspects of this sort of works as part of this works. This has been an audio podcast aligned to the ZtormTronix case review v.3. This is an audio podcast aligned to nephrology and how do young people with chronic kidney disease (CKD) cope, and what are the experiences between pediatric renal services and adult renal care. This has been an audio podcast aligned to a Storm Lobostic RFPB, and this is another Storm Lobostics production. Thank you for tuning in.